Imagine this scenario. You're finally ready to pour a glass of that homemade mead you've been working on for months. You lift the glass up to the light, expecting that clean, golden, commercial quality sparkle. And instead, it looks like someone scooped it out of a muddy pond. It kind of takes the magic out of the moment, right? You put the work in, but the result looks unfinished. In this video, we're going to dig deep into why that happens. We're going to uncover what exactly that haze is, and I'm going to walk you through the simple practical steps you could take to turn a cloudy, tired-looking mead into something that looks like it came out of a professional cellar. And I want you to stay with me all the way to the end because I'm going to tackle one of the biggest myths about mead clarity. This is a misconception that trips up a lot of new mead makers, and honestly, quite a few experienced ones too. Understanding this might completely change how you judge your own meads from now on. Before we jump into the science and the fixes, I have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy practical real-world mead-making tips that actually work in a home setup, not just a lab or commercial winery or meadery, go ahead and tap the like and subscribe. It helps more mead makers find this content and tells me to keep making videos just like this one. All right, let's talk about what's really hiding in that cloudy glass. To fix the problem, we have to identify the suspect. The first big suspect is almost always yeast. When fermentation slows down, we like to imagine that the yeast politely drops to the bottom, forms a neat little layer of sediment, and leaves the liquid above it crystal clear. But in real life, yeast can be incredibly stubborn. Tiny microscopic cells love to stay floating around in suspension, especially if the mead was moved, carried, or bumped recently. This creates a soft, uniform haze that can hang around for weeks or even months. Now, a little bit of this is completely normal. If your mead is young, this alone might be the cause. But if it has been sitting for a while and it still looks like you're drinking fog, there's probably more going on than just lazy yeast. Here's where it gets interesting. If you're used to fruit in your recipe, berries, apples, stone fruit, really anything like that, another troublemaker jumps into the story: pectin. Pectin is the same natural gelling agent that makes jam hold its shape on toast. It's a structural carbohydrate found in plant cell walls. Inside a mead, that same thickening power can create a permanent haze that just refuses to drop out. You can rack it, you can wait, and it will still look hazy because the pectin is literally holding tiny particles in place, fighting gravity. If you've ever made a beautiful tasting melomel that never quite clears, no matter how long you leave it, pectin is a prime suspect. But we're not done yet. There's a third group of haze makers that almost every mead maker has to deal with: proteins. These can come from the honey itself, especially if you're using raw, unfiltered, or highly floral honeys. They also come from spices, botanicals, or other flavor additions you might throw into the must. Proteins combine with other tiny bits in the liquid and form a silky-looking cloudiness that lingers long after fermentation is done. Sometimes everything smells fantastic, tastes great, but visually, it still looks unsettled because of those protein complexes hanging in suspension. And finally, we have the silent background player: minerals. If you mix your mead with unfiltered tap water or mineral-heavy well water, you've brought in dissolved minerals and other compounds that can interact with proteins and yeast. Under the wrong conditions, that creates slight haze or a fine, persistent cloud that doesn't drop out easily. So now you're potentially dealing with yeast, pectin, proteins, and minerals all teaming up to make your mead look less than Instagram ready. So how do you fight back without turning your kitchen into a chemistry lab? Let's start with the simplest, most underrated tool you have: time. Mead naturally wants to clear on its own if you simply let it. Given enough weeks or months of quiet, undisturbed aging, gravity slowly wins. Yeast drifts down, proteins settle, and a lot of the haze just quietly disappears. If your mead is still young, the most powerful thing you could do is sometimes absolutely nothing. Let it rest, keep it cool and stable, and check it again after a bit of aging. You might be surprised by how much it clears on its own just by being left alone. But maybe you're impatient. Maybe you're gearing up for a competition, or you just want that bottle to look good on the dinner table tonight. This is where the next step comes in: cold crashing. Think of cold crashing as hitting the fast forward button on settling. If you could chill the mead down close to the refrigerator temperatures, we're talking roughly 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and hold it there for several days to up to a couple of weeks, you can change the physics of the liquid. Cold makes the liquid denser and clumps the particles together. This makes it much harder for particles to stay suspended. Yeast protein clumps and other haze-forming bits get heavy and drop to the bottom more quickly. when you eventually rack off that chill mead, you're leaving the gunk behind and keeping the clearer liquid. Now, what if you've given it time? You've cold crashed it and it still looks cloudy. This is when you bring in some specialized help. Fining agent. These are materials that bind to certain particles on a molecular level and drag them out of suspension. One of the absolute classics for mead is bentonite. This is a very fine clay that works extremely well on proteins and yeast. When used correctly, it swirls through the mead, grabs hold of the particles that are causing the haze like a magnet, and carries them down to form a compact layer of sediment. If you're dealing with stubborn haze that stiff arms gravity and time, bentonite is often a great first tool. But bentonite isn't the only option. For particularly difficult cases, or if you really want to polish a mead that's almost there, you can reach for other findings like gelatin or Sparkolloid. These work in slightly different ways, often by attracting particles with a different electrical charge, and can be especially helpful when you have a mix of different haze sources. Maybe you have some protein, a little yeast, and some leftover fruit solids. Combined with patience and careful racking, these findings can take a mead from kind of hazy to impressively clear. Then we get into the perfectionist option, filtration. If you're the kind of mead maker who wants a mead to look exactly like a commercial mead on a store shelf, running it through a fine filter can get you there. We're talking about filter cartridges in a range of 1 to 3 microns. That size is small enough to capture a huge portion of the particles that still remain after fining and cold crashing. When you do this correctly on a stable, finished mead, the result can be a brilliant, sparkling glass that looks almost unreal. It's not something every home mead maker needs or wants to do, but it's definitely an option if clarity is on the very top of your priority list. Now, if you're a fruit lover and you're packing your meads with berries, stone fruit, apples, or anything else, there's one more tool that you absolutely want to know about. This is where we close one of the open loops from earlier regarding pectin. You need to use pectinase. Pectinase is an enzyme specifically designed to break down pectin cell walls. If you add it before fermentation starts, it goes to work on the pectin early, stopping it from locking particles in place and creating a haze later on. The payoff is huge. You get a fruit-heavy mead that has all the color and flavor you want without the long-term cloudiness. And if you didn't use it at the beginning, you can still sometimes use it after the fact. But it is at its absolute best when it goes in up front, before the yeast gets going. So we've talked about what causes haze and how to clear it. But now we need to tackle that big myth I mentioned at the beginning. Does a good mead have to be perfectly clear? The short answer is no. Clarity looks nice. A bright sparkling glass absolutely makes a strong first impression. But in terms of judging, clarity is not the main event. In BJC style competitions, clarity is usually only worth a few points out of the total score. Judges care a lot more about aroma, flavor, balance, and how well the mead matches its intended style. That means a mead that's slightly hazy but tastes incredible will always beat a crystal clear mead that's thin, harsh, or unbalanced. For some traditional meads, especially clean show style examples, clarity is part of the expectation, and it's worth chasing. But if you're making a rustic, fruit-heavy melomel that smells and tastes amazing and just has a bit of haze hanging around, that's not a failure. That is a stylistic choice. The real question isn't, is this perfectly clear? The real question is, does this drink the way I want it to? And once you see it that way, haze goes from being a crisis to being one more dial you can choose to turn up or down. That said, if you do want to push your meads toward the sparkling end of the spectrum, there are 3 habits that will take you most of the way there. First, whenever you're working with fruit, get in the habit of using pectinase at the start. It's a tiny step that prevents a lot of headaches later on. Second, before you bottle, give the mead a good cold crash so that as many particles as possible drop out before they ever see the cork or a cap. Third, allow your mead the gift of time. Good aging doesn't smooth out flavors. It quietly solves a lot of the clarity issues all by itself. Those 3 together, enzyme, cold, patience, do more for clarity than any single magic product. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's your experience with cloudy mead? Have you found a trick or a timing sweet spot that suddenly made your meads clear up? Drop your story or your favorite hack in the comments. Other mead makers really do read those and learn from them. And if this breakdown helped you feel a little bit less worried about haze and a little more confident about how you handle it, tap that like and consider subscribing so you don't miss future deep dives like this. For more information and more mead making videos I've created, check the videos out over here. Until next time, happy mead making.